In 1967, I finished my tour of duty with the United States Army. I had been all over the country. I had been fortunate enough not to have to go to Vietnam, but I was on the way several times, and something happened, so I didn't have to go. So I was reflecting on that, both on my way back and after I got back in Seattle. I had thought about being a student. I had thought about that when I was in the service, because people would always ask, what are you going to do when you get out of here? And you never know. And it just fortuitous for me that I was, there used to be a place on the Ave. It was an all-night diner right on the corner of 42nd and the Ave. Coffee Corral, it was called. And it was kind of just a local hangout, because it was stayed open all night, and so students would go in there and study and whatever. And so I was sitting in there one night, and an older gentleman came in, or he looked older. He sat down next to me, and I happened to be writing in my journal. And he asked me if I was a student. I said no. And he said, well, I see you writing and stuff. I said, oh, I'm just writing in this thing. He said, oh, you're a writer? I said, no. But he asked me if he could see it. I said, whatever. Sure. You know, so he looked at it for a few minutes, and he kept saying to me, and you're not a student? I said, no. So he said, well, maybe you should come see me and talk about that. So he told me who he was. He was a professor of English for the university. And so he gave me his card and told me where he was on the campus. And so I took his card, and I didn't think anything about it. And then about a week later, I looked at his card, and I said, maybe I should go see him just to see what he has up his sleeve. So I went to see him in his office, and he said, oh, I'm so glad you came, and so on and so forth. I've been thinking about you, and I have this letter for you. He didn't tell me what was in the letter, and it was in a very formal envelope with the university logo on it and all that, and it was sealed. So I had no idea what the content was. So he said, I want you to go down the street off the campus, because he was in Padelford Hall, and he said, to take this to admissions, and we'll see what happens. So I took it down to Schmitz Hall, and I gave it to the woman at the front desk, and she took it back to somebody else, and they came out and said, well, just wait here for a few minutes, and turned into about a 20-minute wait. And then they called me back and said, well, the professor really thinks a lot of you, and thinks that you should be a student. And I kind of blushed a little bit, and I didn't know what to say, I remember. And then he said, and he's recommending that you be accepted in the university as a fully matriculated student. And I said, what's that? I thought maybe I was in trouble. So they said, no, he thinks that you have enough talent or skill or whatever, that you're a good writer, and you should be in school. And so we're, based on his reputation here, I think he said he was a assistant dean of English at the university, that he recommended that you become a student here, and we're concurring with him. And so we're going to offer you the opportunity to be at the university as a fully matriculated student beginning of fall quarter 1968. And that just kind of blew me away, because I was just flabbergasted. I didn't know what to say. And so, I mean, I said thank you. I remember that. And I remember them telling me where to go elsewhere in the building to fill out some papers and go to see the registrar and go to see Bill Baker at Financial Aid and all that. And I did all that. But I was in a daze, because here I was, just fresh out of the service, didn't know exactly what I was going to do, didn't really have a plan. I was glad to still be alive, glad to still not have been injured or whatever. Was fairly traumatized by my military experience, and I wasn't prepared for it because I was drafted. And now here I was going to be admitted to this huge place that I hadn't really thought about all that much. So that began a very interesting sojourn here at the university for me, in terms of my relationship with the university. One of the people I grew up with, Larry Gossett, I grew up with him in the community, and we graduated from high school together. We went two different pathways. He went to New York to be in in a special program, kind of a Vista program that was, and he went to go in Harlem, and that took the place of a military obligation. I got drafted, and I was kind of on my way to Vietnam. So we had different kind of out-of-body, out-of-community experiences. But we reunited. He told me the work he was doing here on the campus, because he came in '67, and he that started the Black Student Union then, and it was fairly small because there weren't that many students here. And then, as it turned out, there were a small group of students that were on campus, African American students, and we began to coalesce and talk about what should happen at the university and kind of build some momentum around that. And that was the beginning of my political activism, I think, on the campus. My political activism actually started when I was living in the community, but it was a different kind of political activism, I think. I mean, I was a student activist here, but I started really as a community activist when I was still in high school. I got drawn into to participate in the movement in Seattle to develop an open housing policy, because this was prior to the passing of the Civil Rights Act and all that movement that was going to go on later on. But being a native of Seattle, I had witnessed firsthand the discrimination that was in housing, and so I was kind of interested in why it was like that and what might happen. And so there was a movement that got started here by some African Americans, some Asians, and progressive whites to change the open housing ordinance, or to create an open housing ordinance in Seattle. And so I was 17, I was still in high school, and I got involved in that movement. We'd go to meetings, and we would go and march downtown, and we'd march through town and around City Hall and all that. And that was my first kind of inclination. And then my second one was I got involved with some people who were actually from the university, the Valentines, I think it was Charles and Betty Lou Valentine, a mixed race couple who were in charge of the local CORE office. And the CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, was a key group that came out of the South, the Civil Rights Movement in the South. And they started a chapter here, and they basically hooked into all the things that were going on here. They hooked up with the NAACP and some other groups, some other church groups that were trying to do something around some of those same issues that were coming up. And they were interested also in issues around de facto segregation in the public schools and those kind of issues, and employment in the public and the private sector. And so they had a chapter office over on 23rd and Union, and I remember going to their office several times, wanting to know more about what was going on, and it got me more interested in the civil rights movement because it seemed so far removed, because everything was about the South. Everything was about what was going on in Birmingham or Selma or wherever, but you didn't hear that much about what was going on in Seattle. So it made you think. I mean, I had a different experience, obviously, than people who were raised in the South. The Southern experience wasn't my experience, but I had a Northwest experience, but that didn't seem to matter, even though it seemed some of the things I would see on TV or some of the stories I would hear, I would find a parallel here to some degree. There were no formally separate senses of separation. It was very informal, but it was also very vivid. You kind of knew different parts of town where you were welcome and where you weren't welcome. But there weren't any separate bathrooms or facilities like that. It was just a matter of hospitality, I think, more than anything else. You felt less hospitable in certain places than you felt somewhere else. I always had a context of living mostly south of the Ship Canal, but of living in integrated communities. People had a strong, maybe economic class connection that spilled over into their kind of racial connectedness. And so I always lived in places where there was a context for people being profoundly civil. But remarkably so, there was a very vast class difference here, like there is now, and so I think that was the major thing, is that you could tell the difference between, in your living conditions, between what your real status was in the society or in Seattle and and what somebody else's was. It was quite obvious that if you lived on a hill, if you lived near the water, if you live in certain communities that seem to be somewhat sequestered from the rest of everybody else, like Madison Park or whatever, that meant something a little different. But there weren't. But like I say, there wasn't like people would run you out of the community or whatever. It's just that the way I grew up was I played with a lot of different kids as a young kid who came from different class backgrounds. I mean, I think my family was probably we came from a poor family and segued into a kind of a low middle class family, whatever. And not living in the projects, moving out and moving in a regular neighborhood and all that. But and so I came in contact with a lot of people who were just regular, ordinary folks, just working hard and doing what they needed to do, and they came from all kind of backgrounds. And so I think that I didn't get as much feeling maybe about how, if it was degrading or less than or whatever. I didn't get as much of that, maybe because of where I live. I live mostly in southeast Seattle as opposed to the central area. A lot of my political activism was actually in the central area as opposed to where I grew up. And so that was a challenge for me in the sense that I didn't have as much familiarity. I went to Franklin, not Garfield. And so my sense of kind of unity in the community was a little different than people who went to Garfield. And that was actually a good thing because it made me work harder to try to make some connections between the social phenomena that we were trying to change in the community. So it made being in the central area very intriguing in terms of I wanted to know more about what were the dynamics in the community, who were the movers and shakers, what was going on here, what made it special, what made it not special. There seemed to be a lot of unity in the community, that people seemed to get along between the blacks and the Asians and the whites and the Jewish community and other folks. And so that was similar to the way I grew up before, maybe for a different reason. The dynamics, I guess, by which I think that brought about this need to see more kids of color, more African American kids on this campus, came from both, I guess, an inner desire as well as also a reflection of what was going on in other places. The idea is that people felt that they deserved the opportunity to be here in more than ones and twos. There needed to be some masses of folks here who were historically left out. And so we didn't know why people weren't here. We just knew that they weren't. We knew a few people that had graduated with us who ended up being at the university, and every time I would talk to them, the few people that I knew, they felt profoundly isolated. There was no sense of community here for them or whatever. And so for me, at least on a personal level, that was my context, is that here was a real big place. I had been here when I was a little younger, right before I went in the service, so I understood what the place looked like, and it looked pretty big to me. And I couldn't imagine a place bigger than my high school where I didn't know anybody, couldn't relate to anybody, or no one would talk to me or whatever, And so from that context, I think it was important to look at the university as a place in which maybe you could make a case for a larger presence of people who you didn't see walking around the campus. On the other hand, we also understood in the early days of when I got involved with Larry and other people in the Black Student Union, was that there were campuses all over the United States in which there was that similar desire, and there were forces that said that we should that there should be some political activity around doing something about that, changing the landscape or whatever, and so I think that the impetus came from both a curiosity or an inner desire to make the university a little bit more representative of the population as a whole, and also to reflect upon the dynamics that were going on in other places in which there was some dynamics, some social dynamics on campus by students that said to the administrators or whoever, why not? I mean, it was asking a rhetorical question. And so I think that the main emphasis for us, I think, it got to be, whether we ask or not, we certainly need to capture the imagination of both the university and the students here, as well as the general public. And I think that was the dynamics around the sit-in. I mean, we never, I don't think initially, I didn't think of the university as being some big bad bully or whatever, just that maybe they were a little naive or whatever. And they, a lot of times, reflect the values of this general society. And people think things are good, but maybe they were liberal, but not liberal enough. And so it's like pushing the envelope, I guess is the term that people use now. We were pushing the envelope. And so in this building that we're standing outside of right here, there's a lot of history here. And I just remember, as I look out here, that in 1969, when we had made that decision, I think in a room in the library or in our office or wherever, when we went around the room and asked all the people that were in the room, the 20 or 30 people in the room, what role do you want to play in this? And some people said, well, I'm nervous, I don't want to play any role. Somebody said, I want to be the one that goes in the building. Some people said, I want to be on the outside coordinating the support or whatever. That was a monumental decision to be made, because none of us knew what the consequences would be. I think more we were trying to figure out, maybe if we could draw more attention to this, that maybe it would at least create an opportunity for dialogue. I don't know if we ever really anticipated, honestly say that we anticipated that the university would roll over and say, oh yeah, we're going to admit all these folks, as soon as we can, as soon as we set up the mechanism to do that. But that's kind of what happened. I mean, so that was it was a victory in a way. It was like I guess in the term of, if you want to call it this, it's a small form of a bloodless coup, where no one had to get hurt. And even though, the people made big hay out of us holding Dr. Odegaard, the president of the university, hostage and all that. I mean, we weren't really holding him hostage. He could go if he wanted to go, but we were going to stay. I think that the issue really got down to how could we impress upon him and other people in his administration that not only were we serious, that we had almost a social cause that was worth supporting. The university needed to be one representative, because we weren't in the South. We were way up north. And why not? Why not in Seattle? Why not with the largest university in the Northwest? And so I think the rhetorical question that we got to ask was put in front of a lot of different people. And I think that the fact that we didn't have to commit, we did some civil disobedience, but it was fairly harmless in terms of what happened maybe in other places around trying to make other things happen. The whole notion, Seattle was already integrated, so we weren't fighting that battle like they were fighting in the South. We might have had a lot of de facto segregation here, and that's basically what it was. But it was, de facto segregation is different than Jim Crow. No one, some people like to say that they're the same, but they're really not the same. And if they are the same, they're only the same in a very, very profound rhetorical way. But in terms of, in terms of saying, well, you could tell people, for example, that I won't rent an apartment to you. You'd have all kind of excuses to do something about that. To make that happen. But there wasn't a law that said that, you can't rent to blacks. Now, let me take this back and say this. Later on, we found out that the reason that was a little bit wrong is because we didn't know our history. We didn't know as much local history. So later on, we found out that in certain areas of Seattle, in the central area, in the International District, there were covenants that people were not allowed to rent or sell to people who were black or Asian in particular, or Indian. And so in 1968, when the city council finally decided to overturn that, maybe in congruence with the new civil rights legislation, that was a moral victory for everybody. But I think that's as close as we got to a similarity of the South per se. in this city. And I don't think the university. I think the university, it wasn't that there weren't any people of color here. There were, that the numbers were very, 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 very small. When I was here as a student, I met so many students from all different backgrounds who were so willing to talk, if we were willing to talk. And so one of the best things that I remember that happened to me here as a student was being able to go, whether I was representing the Black Student Union or the Black Panther Party, to go to all the different dorms and go into the common space and just talk to folks about issues and about their life here and where they came from and what we were trying to do and all that kind of stuff. And I think that was the high point for me in a way, because it wasn't about, it was just having a conversation with people who were just ordinary folks and hear their story about why they got here. And there were so many commonalities that here it is, I was talking to all these students, a lot of white students where, like me, they were the first person from their family to ever go to college. And so we had something in common. And when they would tell their story about what their parents did, they came from Eastern Washington and they worked on a farm and so on and so forth. And that's really struck me, because the idea is that everybody's family wanted better for their children. Because of the kinds of things that we were reading about and the kinds of things that the kinds of people that we were interacting with who came from other places, it was very enlightening to know that it took a little of both, that somehow there was a belief that somehow that civil disobedience might be our best friend if we understood what it really meant. Maybe we were taking some of our lead from some of the work that was in the civil rights movement, or some of the other things that were going on in other places that were national liberation struggles or whatever. And the idea is that you had to up the ante some kind of way. The idea is to have it be, and maybe in the process of now what we call developing a civil society, would it be in a way in which no one had to get hurt? Could people change their mind, develop a new politic about being civil or whatever, and have things change like that? Or did you have to struggle for it on a different level? And we used to talk about that all the time. And the issue really was, do intellectuals who are on a campus, no one comes to the campus to learn how to be a blue-collar worker. You come here to be a white-collar worker or an intellectual or whatever, an academic or something, a scientist. Would they be at the forefront of a revolution? And we said yes, but we were still struggling with what that really meant. And the other thing that I found out was that there were people who had come through a form of academia who were African American, who were terribly proud of us. They were proud that we were on campus. They were proud, and they were even more proud that we attached ourselves to a certain form of militancy that was trying to change things. And so that was important. I mean, I ran into that time and time again. I had a girlfriend whose father was actively involved in the NAACP, and it was right in the middle of me being a Black Panther, and they had built a house on top of Queen Anne Hill, had a swimming pool and all that. I mean, he was living large for those days, and he was so proud of me whenever he had parties where he'd invite all these judges and lawyers and other doctors and other people who were part of the kind of the black bourgeoisie in Seattle. I always got invited to come, and you know, they'd always make sure that everybody else knew that I was his daughter's boyfriend, you know. So it was kind of like, at first I thought I was kind of being set up, but then people would always tell me after they had a few drinks, I just wonder how far a little scotch went. Little Johnny Walker Red made him loosen up a little bit and say the truth, and basically said, you know, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, I'd be doing what you're doing. And so I'm so proud of you that you're, you know, and if you need anything. I mean, there were so many people that would extend themselves like that, but in a less formal way, they were probably very scared because they didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, you never know when you take those kind of risks. The other thing that was really interesting to me was that in the Black Student Union, we had several females, some Native American young women and some white young women, along with some African American young women, that were very, very gracious in terms of donating their time to help us get our affairs together. They would help us mimeograph stuff and type stuff and mobilize stuff and, you know, get set up in so many different ways, and they were really part of our work. And I always lamented that they never got the credit that they should have, but they were like, I always just say this at meetings, because they were invited to come to our meetings too, but they were kind of the backbone, of what we were trying to do, and they were supportive unconditionally, but when the cameras came, they no one ever mentioned their name, or they didn't get the recognition that they deserved. And that was pretty true throughout the movement almost everywhere. It wasn't just, it was like the men would rush the microphones, and that's the way it is, So, you had people, they were going up in I think it was one of those sides, and then we were because the president's office or whatever was right up there. And so we would walk from here around here with just a big long oblong circle with our signs, and then we got joined by people that came from the undergrad library, which was kind of nice, because you had people getting out of class and whatnot. They didn't know what was going on, because obviously this is something you didn't advertise. You just did it. We were ready, and so it created a little stir on campus. You have people. No, so you have people who would come by and look, and then they would keep going, and then other people would join in. They would just walk with us. So that was kind of cool. I guess the other thing that was kind of remarkable about that day or those times is that it made you feel that there was this one place that was the center of power in the university, just in this one building. And for all the vastness of the university, it just seemed remarkable that this was the one place that we had to go to make a change. Here we are at at the president's office outside his building, getting ready to climb up the wall to go into his office. To ask him to let a whole bunch of other folks who look like us into the university, it almost seemed ridiculous in a way to be doing that, with so few people. But I guess we never let the numbers, we figured we had a philosophical premise or a political premise that was correct. And so we just kind of led with that. And then until told something different. I mean, it'd be, ironically, because they said yes, I think it caught us off guard too, that something did happen. A program got created that would let people in. I think we were prepared to, we talked a lot about, what are we going to do if they say no, and what are we going to do next? And we're going to ratchet everything up and become even more militant, but we didn't have to do that, so that was really ironic. I felt very honored to be part of that, and I still do, and that's why I think that even to be asked to talk about it, I feel honored, even though to me I played such a small role in terms of all the things that were going on here. But I do feel that one of the things that happened to me that I really felt a sense of pride about is that because of my participation here, I got a chance to also meet a lot of other people who had different roles to play here on campus. I got to speak to a lot of students in different contexts. I met a lot of grad students who were teaching a lot of different topics, and they would contact people either in the Black Panther Party or the Black Student Union and ask, could you send somebody to our class? We're talking about this, that, the other, some of the social or political dynamics of the world as you all might see it. We want to hear your point of view. And so I remember many times either going into a class or sitting on the grass in the quad or somewhere else on campus with people who were either graduate students or seniors or whatever. Even when I was a freshman, I mean, we were talking to these folks like they were our peers. But I was really humbled by, like I said, by the fact that people thought I had something to say, that I represented something or a point of view that they didn't get a chance to really talk about that much. And they knew that we read a lot, and the idea was that sometimes when we were reading some of the same stuff they were reading, they wanted to know what our take on it was. What do you think about this? What do you think about some of the people who are promoting revolution? What do you think about Fidel Castro? What do you think about Frantz Fanon? What do you think about Amilcar Cabral? What do you think about Samora Machel? What do you think about Ho Chi Minh? I mean, what do we think about these people who, or Chairman Mao, who are alleging to change the dynamics in their society or maybe in the world? And so that was intriguing to me, to be invited to have an opinion about something, even though I was just one of the masses here. And also I had the same dialogue with students a lot. You go to the hub and there would be active debates going on all the time. I just loved that.